Alberta's proposed Sovereignty Act is raising more questions this morning. One hypothetical situation in particular is starting to get a lot of attention. Janice McGregor joins me now from Ottawa. So Janice, good morning. A lot of people are asking what would happen if Alberta decided not to uphold federal gun control legislation.
That's right, Hillary. And of course, this is a bit of an old story in a sense. It's kind of not a news flash. So there are a lot of opponents in Western Canada to firearms laws brought in by successive Liberal governments. Jason Kenney, even before he left the Premier's office, had written to the federal government cautioning it about how the province perhaps would instruct its firearms officers not to be enforcing the recent ban on what Liberals call assault-style weapons. This is now in the form of legislation making its way through Parliament, C21, to bring in a buyback program for people who were previously legal owners of these rifles. But Danielle Smith has now raised the issue of whether the province, under her leadership, could reject C21 as legitimate law and somehow just refuse for its RCMP officers to enforce it once it's passed. Intergovernmental Affairs Minister Dominic LeBlanc was on Power and Politics last night, and he suggested this was a ridiculous idea to suggest that somehow a province could just opt out of firearms legislation that it didn't want to agree with. Take a listen.
Unfortunately, deciding to enforce the Criminal Code of Canada is not an optional thing. The police forces and the prosecutors of the province of Alberta have a constitutional obligation to enforce the Criminal Code of Canada as it properly applies in their province or territory. They know that. Some of this is political posturing, perhaps. The idea that we're sort of going to have a criminal code free zone in Alberta doesn't really make a lot of sense.
Now, yesterday, representatives from the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights were on the Hill, and they were saying that, in their view, it's actually the Liberal government that's being a bit undemocratic for the way it's proceeding with C21. Last week, a day when I have to say all eyes were on the Rouleau inquiry, because last Tuesday was the day that Public Safety Minister Marco Mendicino was a witness. But that evening, the Liberals found enough votes on the Commons Public Safety Committee to bring in an amendment to C21 that dramatically kind of increased the list of weapons that are now banned, including a lot of rifles that are, commonly used for hunting in this country. So now it's covering a much kind of wider net than what the government originally proposed. Here's firearms advocate Tracy Wilson.
Nobody got to speak to this sweeping hunting gun ban amendment. This is a mockery of our legislative system and does nothing for public safety.
A legitimate process, then Mr. Mendicino should have put it in the legislation to begin with so that the parliamentary process could have actually taken place. We could have commented, we could have talked about this, they could have answered questions on it, but they did a late stage amendment for a reason. They didn't want it to go through the process.
Now, of course, this is a minority parliament. The Liberals cannot pass something like C21 without the support of the NDP or the Bloc, or in the case of most kind of firearms gun control bills, they do have the support of those two parties in principle. But I also took note of how Charlie Angus, a New Democrat who represents a Northern Ontario riding, was talking to reporters yesterday about the fact that all these hunting rifles are now part of this, and suggesting this is really a problem in rural Canada and something the Liberal government needs to fix. Might predict also this came up in question period yesterday. Here's opposition leader Pierre Poilievre raising why all these hunting guns are now considered banned.
Includes the Webley and Scott wild fowl gun. Fowl is in wild turkeys and wild ducks. That's right in the list that his government put forward of guns he wants to ban. Mr. Speaker, why is he more concerned with protecting wild turkeys from hunters than he is concerned about protecting Canadians from criminals?
So Janice, Poilievre, they're talking about that list. So how is the government explaining this now longer list of banned guns?
Well, you might remember a couple of years ago when it came out during the pandemic, firearms gun control advocates, if you will, were going through it and finding loopholes that sort of it contained this, but not this, this, but not this, saying it wasn't clear enough, that there should be kind of more, especially semi-automatic weapons, made sure that they were part of the criteria and included. So Mendicino yesterday was trying to explain this amendment as kind of necessary language to make sure there weren't loopholes, that they needed to kind of clarify things like the core diameter of a rifle that would be effective and caught up in this in order to protect the integrity of what the government was trying to do. But on the issue of jurisdiction, he maintained that it's absolutely the federal government's job to make the law about what guns are illegal in this country.
When it comes to matters of gun control and regulation, I mean, the Supreme Court has established for many years now that that is within the exclusive jurisdiction of the federal government.
So the Alberta government may not like what's in C-21, but it's really not clear that there's anything that Danielle Smith and her party can do about it.
Okay, Janice, thank you for this. Janice McGregor for us in Ottawa.